Welcome to this explainer. Okay, we are going to dive right into this because today we're looking at a truly defining moment in history. We're going to explore how a single, honestly, seemingly impossible waterway effectively shrank America, slashed costs across the board, and ignited the American Industrial Revolution. Yep, we are talking about the legendary Erie Canal. To really wrap our heads around the massive impact of this achievement, I want you to imagine something for a second. Think about trying to run a business today where a modern equivalent of next-day delivery costs thousands and thousands of dollars. Just imagine a world where the sheer cost to move your goods from point A to point B completely paralyzes your ability to even trade. Well, that is exactly the harsh reality early Americans were facing. So let's get into it. Section 1. The Inland Bottleneck. Transportation in 1815. Back in the early 19th century, the young United States was caught in this massive geographic trap, and it was literally choking economic growth. Early American commerce was strictly limited to the coastlines and the naturally navigable rivers. So if you lived on the coast, you were totally fine. But if you were a settler or a farmer out in the vast interior of the country, you were completely landlocked. You were entirely isolated from the major markets because moving anything over land was just an absolute nightmare. And the sheer scale of the disparity here is staggering. To put this into perspective, dragging goods over terrible, muddy dirt roads cost 30 cents per ton-mile in 1815. Now, compare that to ocean transport, which costs less than a single cent. Moving goods over land costs more than 30 times as much. That effectively cut off the entire interior of America from the global economy. Moving on to Section 2, early roads and turnpikes, paving the way west. So, how do you fix a crippling geographic problem like that? Well, the young nation first turned its hopes toward basically paving its way west. Private companies saw this massive need, and they actually coordinated to build highly organized turnpike networks across central New York to push through the Appalachian Mountains. And at the exact same time, the federal government stepped in to fund the famous National Road, you might know it as the Cumberland Road, stretching westward. But here was the fatal flaw in that plan. While these toll roads were fantastic for moving people, they were still fundamentally way too expensive for moving heavy bulk freight like timber or grain. The math just didn't work out. Which brings us to Section 3, the Erie Canal Miracle, a 363-mile waterway. It turns out the ultimate killer app of the era wasn't a road at all. When the federal government declined to participate, New York boldly stepped up and funded this massive public works project entirely on its own. We're talking about a 363-mile artificial river. And this is exactly what a high-tech transportation system looked like in the 1820s. You had mules and horses pacing along a towpath, pulling these freight boats. These were very often family-owned vessels, where the family lived right there in the stern, and the animals rested in the bow between their shifts. And even in its earliest, shallowest days, when the canal was only 4 feet deep, these boats were capable of quietly hauling 30 tons of cargo at a time. No big deal, right? But here is the crucial point, and it's a mind-blowing economic disruption. Before the canal, dragging a ton of wheat by wagon from Buffalo all the way to New York City took 20 agonizing days and cost $100. After the canal opened, that exact same trip took just 10 days and cost a mere $5. Guys, that is a 95% drop in shipping costs. Literally overnight, the unimaginable became incredibly profitable. Unsurprisingly, the canal was an immediate, resounding triumph. Construction kicked off in 1817 and wrapped up in 1825, completely revolutionizing trade. Actually, it was so successful that it literally caused traffic jams. They had to continually enlarge it. Starting around 1836 and culminating in the Civil War era of 1862, the canal was widened from 40 feet to 70 feet and deepened to 7 feet. That allowed it to accommodate massive boats carrying up to 270 tons of cargo. And wow, did it pay off handsomely. New York State spent roughly $7.5 million building the original canal. But before tolls were finally abolished in 1882 to compete with railroads, this state-owned engineering marvel had raked in a staggering $121 million for the state coffers. In its peak year of 1862 alone, it brought in over $4.5 million in a single year. Talk about the ultimate return on investment. Now for Section 4, an economic ripple effect, unifying the nation. The real legacy of the Erie Canal wasn't just the toll money, though. It was the invisible force that unified a fractured economy. By making it so remarkably cheap to move bulk goods, the canal created this really powerful symbiotic relationship. Eastern farmers suddenly couldn't compete with the fertile, newly accessible lands of the Old Northwest. So the Midwest became the absolute dominant supplier of food, timber, and raw materials. Meanwhile, the East Coast, completely relieved of that agricultural pressure, pivoted hard into mass manufacturing. And right at the center of this massive exchange was New York City, cementing its status forever as the nation's premier Atlantic seaport and commercial hub. Because of all this, the Erie Canal earned an incredible nickname, the Mother of Cities. It literally dictated the pattern of urban growth in the 19th century. It pulled populations from New England straight into upstate New York and out into the Midwest, actively shaping the destiny and the explosive growth of major urban centers like Chicago, Cleveland, Buffalo, and Syracuse. It physically bound the nation together.
And finally, Section 5, the next revolution.
Innovation never just stands still. The canal perfectly solved the bottleneck of the early 1800s, but eventually it had to pass the baton to the next great technological marvel. Enter the steam locomotive. While canals were cheap, railroads were much faster, and crucially, they could operate year-round, totally unaffected by winter freezes. So the railroad boom overtook the nation. By 1868, the sheer freight tonnage carried by the New York Central and Erie railroads finally surpassed that of the mighty New York canals. The transportation revolution had evolved once again. So now that you understand how a simple 4-foot-deep ditch radically unified and transformed an entire nation, it leaves us with a really fascinating question to ponder. We've seen how the Erie Canal slashed friction and opened up a continent. So look around us today. What invisible, ambitious infrastructure is being built right now that's going to spark our next great economic revolution? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep looking for those connections.